We have a deep sea scuba diver in the audience, I see.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Stepped outside the ship for a second.
That's awesome.
Social distancing. Taken to the extreme.
Nice.
Yeah, submarine would be tough for that. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to the penultimate Spring Open Ocean Seminar. I'm Dr. Katie Croft-Bell, Director of the Open Ocean Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. Now, before we get started, I just want to give you a quick reminder that our final spring seminar will be next Monday, June 1st, with Tara Roberts at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. And we're also lining up a summer seminar series, which will start on June 15th with Brendan Phillips from the University of Rhode Island, so stay tuned for more information. You can sign up for our mailing list. I'm going to put a link in the chat for updates on news, events, and opportunities in ocean exploration, including the seminars. So if you're not already on the list, please sign up and we will get you more information about the summer schedule. And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, Dr. Grace Young, an avid sailor, diver, and National Geographic Explorer. Grace earned her bachelor's degree in mechanical and ocean engineering at MIT and her doctorate at the University of Oxford. In 2014, she lived underwater for 15 days, legitimately, not just with a zoom lens, as an engineer and scientist on Fabien Cousteau's Mission 31, and she, at the time, was the youngest female Aquarius Aquanaut. Today, Grace will share how her passion for the ocean has evolved and what she sees as trends in ocean technology development, including her current work at X, Alphabet's Moonshot factory. So I will turn it over to Grace. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited about your talk. And Grace would also like to keep this one a little more informal than the talks we've had previously. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or interrupt as we go through the seminar. You don't have to wait until the end. So Grace, take it away.
All right, thanks, Katie. I'm thrilled to be here. I thought today, before talking about my current work at Tidal, I wanted to take a few steps back and talk about how my passion for the ocean has evolved, and then what I see as trends in technology, ocean technology development. And as Katie said, I'm really looking forward to questions. So we'll see how it goes, but feel free to interrupt either through chat or if you can with audio. We should have plenty of time for discussion because I'm only planning to speak with slides for about 20 minutes. I was really psyched to join today's chat, and recently I've been talking to a lot of kids and non-ocean audiences, and so for them my take-home message is that the ocean is amazing and full of opportunity. But of course Katie's group all are 100% on board with that, and a lot of what I've learned from Katie and probably others in this call, and so I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Something that has struck me about various conversations I've had about my time underwater doing some extreme diving and sailing is that some people can't get over the question of, aren't you scared of being around the ocean so much? And to answer that, at first I would talk about all the training I've done, years of training, and then for follow-on questions I'd almost go through items like a risk assessment. But I could tell the idea of being scared of the ocean was very ingrained in a lot of people. And to that I say, look at our planet. I know I don't need to remind our group of this, but this is a view of our world so many rarely see. We know half of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. The ocean regulates our climate. It provides food for billions of people. We could all go on. And yet so many people are really scared of the vast blue space. Here, one of the reasons that we know so little about the ocean is because, of course, our human biology just can't handle it without technology. This photo shows me with all of the gear I needed to spend just 10 minutes at 330 feet underwater. 330 feet sounds kind of deep, and it's deeper than recreational scuba limits, but it's still just barely scratching the surface of the ocean, as you all are well aware. So we need technology to explore the ocean. I think that's a tremendous opportunity, but of course also a risk, and I look forward to discussing that with this group. One piece of underwater technology I have a particular affection towards is this beautiful underwater habitat called Aquarius. Most don't know that Aquarius exists, but kids are generally not surprised because they've been watching the show Octonauts, a cartoon about animals living underwater. So in 2014, for 15 days, I lived and worked underwater from this habitat on a mission led by Fabien Cousteau, Jacques Cousteau's grandson. We did this on the 50th anniversary of Jacques Cousteau's mission living underwater on Conch Shelf 2, which was one of the original underwater living experiments. I had to miss my college graduation ceremony because of this, but you see I flipped my brass rat underwater, so that was fun. My sister is missing her graduation too this year, but for a different reason, because of COVID. So my poor parents have never gotten to go to a graduation, and neither of us graduated from high school either. That's a different story. But yeah. So 6 of us aquanauts were living in the space the size of a yellow school bus, so it was pretty cozy. I say the inside felt a bit like the combination of an RV and a space station. We had, on the one hand, a small bunk room and a kitchen area, but also one half of the habitat was covered in switches and valves needed to maintain the pressure inside the habitat. We had eagle rays circling the habitat daily. Here's one through the viewport in the bunk room. We had Goliath Grouper and other creatures come near the habitat, creatures you often don't see on a regular scuba dive. I started to feel, in some sense, like a marine mammal myself. Here in the picture, I'm standing on top of our emergency air supply cylinders, and you can see the same eagle rays circling in the background. Some people mistakenly call the underwater habitat a submarine, but it's different for a few reasons. One is, for one, it's bolted to the seafloor. But secondly, and more importantly, the inside of the habitat is kept at an air pressure that matches the surrounding water pressure. So inside a submarine is 1 atmosphere of pressure, the same atmosphere we're all breathing now, except for maybe Dan, who's underwater. With the habitat, because the inside air pressure is kept to match the surrounding water pressure, in our case, we were living at about 20 meters, so like 2 atmospheres of pressure, we could enter and exit the habitat as we pleased underwater. And that was the amazing thing. We were sometimes diving for up to 8 hours a day. Normally at that depth, you could have maybe 2 or 3 45-minute dives a day. And so by being able to work for 8 full hours, we got so much more research done, and we had time to set up scientific equipment. We couldn't do that on standard scuba dives. While we were down there, we were running about 6 different research experiments for graduate students at Northeastern Marine Science Center. Those included looking at plankton to see how their community composition changed during the day. We were collecting DNA samples of sponges, doing a range of projects. I was there because I helped adapt this ultra high-speed camera to the underwater environment. Our human eyes, we see at about 30 frames per second, and the slow motion setting on an iPhone is 240 frames a second. This camera could film at up to 18,000 frames per second. It was invented by another MIT alum, Mike Matter, who is now just around the corner from me in California. And it's named after famous MIT professor Doc Edgerton, who worked with Cousteau back in the day. I wonder if they ever imagined that derivatives of their technology and legacy would come full circle decades later. the high-speed camera let us see things that move faster than the human eye can detect. It let us see those events in slow motion at a speed we could comprehend. And there's the camera there. I've circled it now. In this picture, believe it or not, I was very comfortable with my head in the sand. So there I am upside down. What happened was the helmets we were diving in were really heavy, even underwater. I think they were 30 pounds negative. And since we were diving for hours and hours at a time, it was comfortable. Every hour or so, I'd let my head do the natural thing and just fall to the seafloor. And so I was taking a break for a minute, letting my head fall, and I was staring at this patch of sand for maybe 30 seconds when I realized that I was staring eye to eye with a very well camouflaged mantis shrimp. And so we brought these are creatures that move really fast. So we brought the camera down and started filming. Now I'm going to switch to some videos, what we found. Give me a moment. All right. Anticipation is going to make it so much sweeter. All right. You see the sand? Yes. Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Cool. Here is what we saw that well camouflaged mantis shrimp doing with the high-speed camera. In real time, when I was there, I had no idea that the shrimp was even feeding. It just moved so fast. It moves faster than a bullet comes out of a gun. So it just looked like a little poof of sand at 1 second. It wasn't until getting back to the habitat and getting to review this footage that I saw it was feeding on the goby there. Incredible. This was shot at 2,000 frames per second. You can get a sense for how slow that is, looking at how the sand is moving around the shrimp. We filmed dozens of marine species underwater. It was the first time apparently anyone had used an ultra high-speed camera in the underwater environment. At the time, it took about 45 minutes just to set up the camera, and so it was really important to us that we had that extra time underwater. Here, this is a lizard fish coming out of camouflage in the sand, and in real time, from a distance, I just saw this poof of sand every so often along the seafloor. To me, it looked like footprints from a ghost walking underwater. Again, so I pointed the camera at it, and again, it wasn't until seeing this slowed down footage that I realized there was this fish there. And now we can see when it slowed down that the fish makes this perfect S shape back and forth to wriggle its way out of the sand. We originally brought the camera down to investigate a theory about Goliath Grouper. These are a fish. They can be 200, 300 pounds. You see one here, staring eye to eye with my fellow Aquanaut, Liz. And the divers have reported feeling a boom in their chest when the grouper is feeding nearby. And the theory is that the grouper is making a cavitation bubble in its mouth, a bubble that forms and then collapses instantaneously. And that could be used to stun prey around it, for example, so it can swoop in and get them more easily. So our original thinking was to film this cavitation bubble forming. They form in an instant, so we'd need a high-speed camera like we had. And we did get close to the fish. It took a couple days, but they became really comfortable with us. They're familiar with the habitat being there. The habitat's been there 28 years. And it even boomed right in front of Liz, like not too long after this photo was taken. But we realized we need to get the camera inside the fish's mouth, we weren't able to film this, but instead we captured so much more footage here too. So in high school, I spent like just as much time dancing ballet as I did studying in math and engineering. Here's a photo of me. I'm doing some ballet on top of our emergency air supply cylinders underwater. I miss the feeling often of being immersed in the water. You feel that feeling of weightlessness. You could jump really high. At the end of the day, we had to tie our umbilical cords in a figure-8 knot, and not a knot, but in a figure-8 pattern. And to do that, the hooks were, I don't know, maybe a story or half a story up from the seafloor. So on land, I would never be able to do that, but underwater, it's pretty easy to just jump really high and kind of float between the pegs and to put our umbilical cord back, and I really miss that feeling. My first computer vision project was at the Media Lab. It was in Professor Raskar's computational photography class. And that was looking at a ballet dancer's pirouette turn. So pirouette is a fundamental move in ballet, and it's very difficult because your head has to be perfectly in line with your torso and your knee and your foot. There's very subtle changes in your alignment that make the difference between being able to complete one turn or 8 or 9 turns. And yet it's very hard to tell yourself which part of your alignment is off. So I worked on getting the Microsoft Kinect to map the positions of the head and the torso for a dancer's pirouette turn and show which parts of your alignment were off. This was my introduction into computer vision. And then I did my PhD at Oxford on other types of underwater computer vision technologies. My thesis focused on building 3D models of coral reefs using photogrammetry. I love to when tools developed for the underwater landscape help us understand land better. It was because of this work 3D modeling coral reefs that I ended up working at NASA for the summer of my PhD, working on 3D modeling asteroids in space. It might seem super unrelated, but the underlying technologies are similar, making 3D models from low quality image type data. And also, if anyone asks you, I learned that your chances of being killed by an asteroid are greater than your chances of being killed by a shark. I'm fascinated by the geometry. I'm fascinated by the geometry of corals because I think of them as the megacities of the ocean. They host 25% of marine life, and yet they cover less than 1% of the seafloor. And we know a major reason why they're able to do that is because they have this gorgeous, mathematically complex structure to them. So this led me to my current work at Tidal. Hold on, I'm actually gonna. At Tidal, we are a project that recently came out of stealth mode at Alphabet's Moonshot factory. And we work on, our goal is to work on radical new technologies that solve some of the world's biggest problems. Our moonshot at Tidal is to maintain and restore ocean health while sustainably feeding humanity. We're currently getting our feet wet in the aquaculture industry. Why aquaculture? For me, it's because overfishing is one of the biggest problems facing the ocean right now. We've wiped out 90% of the ocean's top predators in the last 55 years. And now fishermen are not only using fish finding sonar, but also there are nets that are 3 times the length of Manhattan. I got that fact from Ian Urbina's book, Outlaw Ocean. And yet, wild fishermen are catching less and less fish. The catch per unit effort has gone way down to the detriment of the oceans. And also, at least half of ocean plastic waste is fishing gear. It's not consumer plastics. So At Tidal, we are tracking and monitoring several metrics of fish and environmental health to let farmers be more informed and make more sustainable decisions. I believe this is necessary to support our planet's growing population. Already 3 billion people depend on seafood as their primary source of protein. Sustainable seafood is a relatively good protein option, whereas beef has a feed conversion ratio of 10:1, salmon's feed conversion ratio is nearly 1:1. And this is important because we've nearly exhausted arable land, and terrestrial farming is carbon intensive and a huge freshwater sink. Salmon hardly require any fresh water, for example. Again, too, we've been farming land animals since Mesopotamia, but fish farming at a large scale is behind. Farmers can't see what's going on under the water most of the time too, and so to inspect the fish, they have to bring the fish out of the water and inspect them as we would on land. I look forward to when we don't have to bring fish out of the water and can instead assess them in their natural environment underwater. Of course, though, working underwater presents some unique computer vision challenges. One is that we can't just scrape the internet for all of the underwater images we need. We had to capture millions of images to train our models. Another challenge is that our common sense that we've spent our whole lives building on land doesn't always apply underwater. We don't have fish intuition. For example, sometimes we'll see a picture of salmon and think they must feel crowded, but really they're schooling animals. So often when the camera is in a pen, it's just these no fish, empty water. And that's because the fish are schooling all together in one corner of the pen. So we have to actively go and find them. Salmon too, they naturally swim into currents. I think if it was us, we would go with the current, but they swim into it. They like getting fresh oxygenated water over their lungs. Also, a temperature change of say 64 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't seem like a big deal to us. The temperature in the room I'm in now has probably fluctuated more than that. But to salmon, who live their whole life in a narrower temperature range than us, that temperature shift can be a huge deal. And these are challenges I believe machine learning is uniquely adapted to solve because it can get around those human biases. It doesn't necessarily come with the same human end biases that we do when looking for patterns. Another challenge, of course, is that we're putting electronics in salt water, two things that generally don't mix. We have limited lighting underwater because light doesn't travel well underwater. GPS, Wi-Fi don't work underwater. All of those standard challenges that everyone deals with, we're dealing with those too. And I think people are often surprised how seemingly behind ocean technology is compared to space technology, but there's so many unique challenges that we still need to address that we have a lot of progress to make. All right, I'm going to switch. So last summer, I spent a few weeks on a different project, and that was to film a documentary with National Geographic and my friend who's a paleontologist in Italy and Professor Federico Fanti. Together, we were comprehending just how old and remarkable coral reefs are. The oldest, and only recently have I really comprehended that fact, how old and remarkable corals are. So the oldest coral fossil is about 500 million years old. That is older than the dinosaurs. They have survived the last 5 mass extinction events. I really can't believe that the extinction period we're in now will be coral's last. So many people think of coral as fragile. Sometimes it feels the only stories we hear about it are that they're bleaching and dying, but it's the most resilient animal I've ever heard of. Last summer, we filmed this documentary. We dove at the base of a volcano in the Caribbean on an island called Montserrat Katie, I know, surveyed the deep sea habitat of that area a bit ago. The volcano there has erupted several times, most recently 10 years ago, and it suffocated the reef below it with ash and pyroclastic flow. And yet we were able to see tiny corals starting to grow again on top of the ash. We saw a similar scene in the Dolomites, where Federico, my partner in the film, is from. The Dolomites are a gorgeous mountain range in northern Italy. It's a popular skiing destination for many. But 300 million years ago, when the continents were Pangea, it was a thriving underwater landscape. We saw there a line in the rock where there was volcanic eruptions. We saw a black line showing where the ash and volcanic flow suffocated coral reefs tens of millions of years ago. And yet again, we saw then reefs starting to grow again on top of that flow. And so my takeaway was that reefs are incredibly resilient. The Dolomites marine history clicked best for me when I saw this fossil that we randomly came across while walking on the path, where you can see, I think, pretty clearly a shell in the fossil record. This is the Dolomite. I've been warned before I went there that the Dolomite is filled with fossils. You find them everywhere you walk. And I saw many that Federico, a paleontologist, pointed out, and some of them weren't quite clear to my untrained eye, but this one really struck home to me. Here's two. So in one photo is me holding a marine fossil that is dated to 300 million years old. It's either a coral or a sponge or maybe a bryozoan. If you just saw that one piece, maybe it wouldn't be clear, but in the other photo, I'm holding two dead coral in Honduras, these kind of coral skeletons. They wash up on the beach all the time. The beach is just full of them, and you can see there are some striking similarities, even though their ages are tens of millions of years apart. So also in the summer, we visited friends starting a research center in Tanzania on the coast. And there they have coral reefs that are perhaps surprisingly doing really well. Here's a photo of those coral. These coral in the photo they were so huge. They were about the size of dinner plates, so brightly colored. And the reefs are unique though because they're in murky water. The water was so murky that most of the time I could barely see my hand underwater. But some scientists think that the shallow, murky water acts as an extra layer of protection from the sun for the corals, and that could be why they're so successful there.
Don't they need the sun for photosynthesis?
They're not blocked from the sun. This photo is taken at, I think, 5 meters deep, so they certainly get sunlight. But perhaps it makes the water a bit cooler or blocks certain rays. We were told we were the first to dive on the reef. Most locals don't swim, surprisingly, but the fishermen around know where the reefs are. They showed us where they are. They fish around there. Again, my takeaway was that, wow, we still have a lot to learn about coral reefs, and they're not all so fragile. In fact, fragile is like the last word I would use to describe them. Looking ahead, I am super excited for what we can accomplish with Tidal. There is huge momentum, and we know now is a tipping point for the ocean, as Dr. Sylvia Earle and David Attenborough keep saying. The next 10 years are the most important in the next 10,000. Moving forward, I would like to see that people and nations understand the value of an ecosystem, especially the ocean, which is so often out of sight, out of mind for many. I think kids care especially. They're the Greta generation. The little ones are watching Octonauts already. I've already seen a change. So when I was talking to kindergartners many years ago, most of the questions I'd get were, haven't you seen sharks? Are you scared of sharks? Would a shark eat you? But now I've gotten questions like, have you seen a mannequin shrimp? Did you know that octopus have 3 hearts? And the teachers have told me they think it's because of the Aquanaut show. 2 years ago, too, I was meeting with middle schoolers, and they asked for project suggestions that they could do to help the ocean. And I started talking about plastic pollution. And they stopped me right away. They're like, oh yeah, we already know. We already got our school to stop all single-use plastics in the cafeteria. What else can we do? I think a lot of people care, but we aren't sure what to do, because real solutions need big collective action, and that's hard. Every successful conservation project, though, I've heard of or know has had local communities driving it or pushing for it. I'm thinking of Cabo Pulmo in Mexico, Palau in the Pacific, the Seychelles and Hawaii. I think of those as some good success stories. Small island nations with incredible marine resources are being offered, I think, low amounts of money for the rights to mine the underwater minerals that they own. I liked reading about what the Nature Conservancy is trying to do, working with those island nations to restructure their national debt so that they don't need to be in a position to make a rash deal, but can prioritize marine conservation. And this is a really critical time to be having those conversations, because with COVID, it's brought into question our relationship with nature. The World Economic Forum just showed that half of the world's GDP is highly or moderately dependent on nature, and that for every dollar spent on restoration, at least $9 of economic benefits can be expected. I think there'll be some positive business action spurred if we know the true value of what things cost, especially as it relates to ecosystems. But right now, for example, you can buy a can of tuna for $3, but that's not the true cost. Over half of high seas fishing would not be profitable if not for government subsidies or human rights violations. I know you can join an all-inclusive cruise for $1,000, but that's not the true cost. I used to fly from London to San Francisco round trip for $400. It's not the true cost. Not when you factor in that I've learned now my sea alone emitted enough carbon to emit 10 cubic meters of sea ice. So working on the ocean requires massive collaborative efforts, not just technology, but people with technology as one tool in their tool belt. I'm so curious to hear your questions, your comments, your perspectives. Let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Grace.